following up from, I met him about 4 years ago. So the country's changing, the Congress is changing, but we have a lot more to do. What I say quite frequently, the people are way ahead of the Congress. Congress is still asleep, and that is our job to wake up Congress and our power Washington. It's a pleasure to be in the hometown of my brother, Dave Paul. He's a minister here in Hudsonville, and he's with me today. Grandchildren. I have one of my grandchildren here, Linda, is with me today. This is Linda. I brought my wife along. I think a few of you have met my wife, Carol. But it is so nice to see such a nice crowd. In Washington, I would have paid to give speeches on the House floor, but I never got applause, so that's why I like to give speeches outside. It's much more fun. But like I said, the country is much further ahead, and I think this has been true for a long time. The people are way ahead of the Congress. I figure Congress is about 20 years behind. But what we need to do is turn the clock up, speed it up a little bit. We need to change it quicker now than ever before. For years, I used to say, a lot of people still say it, and there's some truth to it, and that is that we can't keep spending this money and borrowing money, or we're going to pass this debt on to our children. But I don't say that as much anymore, because I think the next generation that was going to get this debt passed on to, I think we are that generation that inherited the problems of the last 40 years, and that's why we have to deal with our problems right now. Simplify our problems, I would say that we've gotten to this mess because we have sent too many people to Washington that have not taken their oath of office seriously and have not done what they should have. I think the people have been lax and they keep getting them reelected, so it's not all just the Congress and just the President. The people have been lax as well. But we need to change this by changing the people's attitude about what the government should be doing. And let me tell you, the government, under our Constitution, is not supposed to be running a welfare state nor a warfare state. It's there to protect our liberties. Recognize the crisis now and for economic reasons. 4 or 5 years ago, the bubble burst. A few of us talked about that over the years, especially the Austrian free market economists that have been right on their predictions, and they have predicted that this would come, and it did come. But now most of the people realize, not only in this country, but around the world, this is not a U.S. problem. Because we're living with a problem that has been developed differently than ever before. Because we have been the issuer of a fiat currency called the dollar. And the dollar has been used as a reserve currency as if it were gold. And therefore, the inflationary problems of the world, and all the distortions and all the debt crisis is worldwide, and therefore we're facing a crisis bigger than ever. So the recognition is there. And this is not all that bad, because it's when people live with their head in the sand that we keep doing the same thing over and over again. And right now, people are waking up and saying you can't solve the problem of too much spending and too much borrowing and too much debt and too much printing press money by merely doing the same thing over and over again. So that's why I'm optimistic that the people know now that we can't continue on the same course that we have been doing for at least the last 40 to 50 years. The economy is obviously the big issue, and certainly in the state of Michigan, that is the big issue, and it has to be addressed. Some states do better than other states. There are some states in the South that do better than the states in the North, and it's not all accident. The federal government does a lousy job providing the environment necessary to be competitive and to be able to compete throughout the world. because they overtax, they overregulate, and they distort the economy with the inflation, distort the interest rates. So the federal government has a lot of responsibility. In particular, there's one group of people that we should deal with, and I'll talk more about that, and that is that group that's located over in the Federal Reserve building. You know, it's been around for 99 years, and they literally destroyed 99% of the dollar they inherited in 1913. So they're doing a wonderful job, and one of their mandates is a stable dollar and stable prices. I don't think they've done a very good job. The other mandate they have is low unemployment, and they haven't done a very good job there either. But the problems that the Federal Reserve and the federal government with the mandates and the regulations and all that, that's a big thing. But some states suffer more because some states put a greater burden because you have local regulations. And I think the issue mentioned in the introduction is a big issue, and that is the cost of labor. The cost of labor should be competitive. People should be able to, negotiate. And the contract is what's supposed to decide how workers come together and business people come together. There should be no laws prohibiting the organization of labor. Labor should have a right of organizing talk. Negotiate with business, and business and labor should come together. This is the way a market would work. Who knows, in a totally free market, you might have competitive unions, for all that we know, to try to compete for the best job and provide the best workers. But it's in 1935 when they didn't understand the Depression. They claimed the Depression came about because of free markets, capitalism, and the gold standard. So therefore, what did they do? They destroyed the gold standard and brought up a lot more regulations that destroyed the free market and gave us this intervention Keynesianism, which we've been living with for a long, long time. But in 1935, they gave us the National Labor Relations Act, and this distorted the balance. It didn't deal with the right to organize and the right to contract. He said, if you want to get together and organize, you have special power. So when they talk about getting Workers' Rights Act, I think they're misleading because they're not rights to get a clout from the government. Now, big business gets clout too, and that's wrong, but big labor is not supposed to get bigger powers. Now, the compensation that has been conserved over the years, states have gone and tried to get around this by having right-to-work laws and tried to compensate for the special power that have been granted to the unions. So this distorts the market, and the states that have not compensated, they have suffered the very most, and therefore it can't. It has to be addressed. Now, I support a national right-to-work law, and some of the other candidates do not support that law, even though they are conservative Republicans. But the first question that should come, if somebody wants to challenge it, says, well, how can you support a national law? You don't believe in these national laws. What's going on? Well, actually, it isn't a new law, a new process. It's to cancel out that special authority. It's to remove a special power and clout that was given in the 1935. So that would be a big help for a state like this if the economy, if you want to get the economy moving again. I just think of the companies that got into trouble in this breakdown just 4 or 5 years ago, the auto companies that got into trouble. There were a lot of auto companies that were in the South run by other companies, and they didn't have the same problem. So to put our head in the sand and say that this has to happen and persist. But even the bailouts of the company, it wasn't, once again, governments were supposed to be there to guarantee contracts, protect contracts, enforce contracts. So what did the government do? Come in, when they bailed out, they took money from people they shouldn't have taken money to, and then given the money in the bailout and protected individuals that did deserve the protection. So the government should be restrained to protecting contract, protecting the marketplace, protecting private property, and they ought to reduce the amount of regulation, and they ought to give us a sound currency. That's what would help our economy. Woo! politicians to allow the correction to occur. Corrections, when mistakes are made, you're supposed to have a correction. But nobody wants to, go through the correction. So they say, well, what we have to do is bail out companies and the various things because the correction is the way they say too painful. If you don't have the bailouts, there's going to be a depression. And there was some truth to that. The people who have overextended, who especially in the housing bubble, abused it, got into the derivatives market, and they were gambling with all of these derivatives. Yes, they were in big trouble, and the banks owned them, and all the insurance companies and the banks were very much involved. So they said, there's going to be a crisis. It's going to be major. They're too big to fail. Well, the truth is, the free market tries to correct the problems of government. They should have failed. They're the ones who should have failed, not... What happened is the Congress, as well as the Federal Reserve, went and bought up all the bad debt. They didn't liquidate the debt. If you or I get into trouble and we're over our heads with debt, and we want to have our own economic growth again, we have to get our debt out of the way so that we don't have to keep paying interest and accumulating more and more debt, or eventually we can't borrow any more money. A country has to do that too. The debt has to be liquidated. But when they bailed out these countries, the debt was propped up. Japan did the same thing 20 years ago, and they're still in trouble. So what happened to the debt? Did the companies who held the debt and made all the money, are they stuck with it? No, it's on our shoulders, on the middle-class America. And that's why middle-class America is suffering. And the very people the bleeding hearts wanted to help and give a free house to, guess what? They're the ones who lost their jobs and lost their houses. And they're suffering the consequence of the inflation now. So government intervention, government planning, whether it's through the Federal Reserve or through Congress, doesn't work. The people have to plan. The people may have to decide how the money is being spent, not the government and not the politicians and not the bureaucrats. Today, though, we have not resolved that, and it is yet to come because this debt is still hanging. Not only that, is our government, our Secretary of the Treasury as well as the Federal Reserve, have traveled quite frequently, and they talk to the Europeans all the time. And they have essentially promised that we will bail out Europe because we have the reserve currency, and there's still some trust in the dollar. So they have essentially said, we will be there. We will not let this bank fail. Guess who the banks are? They're big banks that we have that have branch banks over there. They're intertwined. They're global in nature. And guess what? The banks and the branches in Europe, guess what they bought? They bought debt from Greece and Portugal and Spain. And they say, well, the debt is illiquid now. What are we going to do? Illiquid means it's worthless. But they own it. They don't want to go bankrupt. So we're over there promising more that we will be bailing them out by printing more money. But the tough part of this, and they better wake up and understand it, is that he just can't do that forever. Eventually, what it does, it destroys the confidence in the dollar, and right now I think that is happening, because now the money is starting to circulate. It's been created in the last 4 or 5 years. You've heard about gasoline prices. One place in Florida, gasoline prices hit $6 the other day, and yet what does Bernanke tell us? Bernanke tells us there's no inflation. Of course, he has a different definition of inflation. Inflation, technically, in the free market is when you print money, create money. He's tripled the supply of money in these last 3 years. That's inflation. And then one of the consequences of inflating the currency are higher prices. So over the years, what do we have? We had high prices in the NASDAQ bubble, and we had high prices in the housing bubble. We had high prices wherever government gets their fingers involved in education. Prices of education much higher than the cost of living. Cost of medical care is very, very high. And then they tell you, there isn't any inflation. But even if you use the old calculation for the CPI, our price is going up about 7%, and he's telling us it's going up 2%. So in other words, just say it is 2%. What he's telling us is that they're allowed to steal 2% of our money every single year and not be charged with a crime. asked both Grigsby and Bernanke in committee about this, about the morality of it and the economics of it. They said, well, we have to keep interest rates low, we have to do this to keep the economy going, we have to look at the big picture, and some people just are going to suffer. Now that is not very nice. Because the very people who might want to take care of themselves, the people who save money, the people on retirement, people living on Social Security, because their cost of living right now is going up a lot more than 2%. So he said that's a consequence. Now, if you had a free market, you know what people might make on their CDs? It could be 6 or 7 or 8%, because that's where the market would be. And but the other major problem when the Fed gets involved in artificially lower interest rates, it causes what we call malinvestment. People do things they shouldn't be doing. Even if you don't see the prices rising, they invest because they think there's been a lot of savings. They might build too many houses or build too many casinos down in Las Vegas and all the different things. So this is the mischief of the Federal Reserve, and eventually it'll be dealt with. This is not new. Destruction of money has been around for a long time, and inevitably, when they finally destroy currency, they always have to go back to something that people know about and they trust, and they go back just as the founders went back. They had runaway inflation with the continental dollar. They put in the Constitution, only gold and silver can be legal tender. You could not emit bills of credit, which is paper money. And they also said, we give you no authority to establish a central bank. Now, immediately, there was a great debate between Jefferson and Hamilton, and in the early years, of course, they kept getting rid of the national bank, but we've been suffering with this for the last 100 years. So I'm hoping on the 100th anniversary that we have a bill that we can pass that says on the 100th anniversary of the Federal Reserve, we're going to have a bill that's going to repeal the Federal Reserve. It enables governments to grow in a sinister manner. Jefferson didn't want to even be able to borrow money, but he didn't win that fight. But they taxed us for everything that they do, and we had to send them a check every month. Believe me, this would all end rather quickly because the people would rebel. In fact, just to make that point, I took this bill one time to repeal withholding taxes. Why should the businessman be a slave and collect those papers and fill out all these forms? The real benefit would be that people would know how much they're paying to the government, and there would be a quick rebellion that would get us back on track again. The borrowing can become noticeable. If you didn't have the Fed to monetize debt, the borrowing would push interest rates out, and then the Congress would have to quit spending because the more they spend, the higher the interest rates drop. But we don't have that check. And so we have the Federal Reserve that just prints the money when the federal government needs the money. So it does hide things, and the victims are sometimes unknown. They're not known immediately, and they can get away with that until the end point when the currency is destroyed. But in the meantime, you might have decades of this. We went off the gold standard completely in 1971. These last 40 years have been nothing but a big bubble being formed. But during that time, just think of what it has grown. The entitlement system and the warfare system, the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about, it's alive and well, and they're spending money. And the thing that really, even though I've studied this for a long time about in Congress, and I know how so many of you feel, they're living with their head in the sand. They're in oblivion in Washington. They don't even, if they thought that the problem was 1/10 as serious as I think that it is, they would quit spending. That's what they should do. The whole system's fed on itself. The entitlement system is alive and well. Politicians did quite well by, just promising whatever the people wanted. We could borrow, spend, we're a wealthy nation. We were the wealthiest nation ever because we were the freest nation. Of course, today, we're not the freest nation, and we're not the richest nation anymore. But the entitlement system got way off base because entitlement sounds like a good word. You know, we like to say we're entitled to our right to our life and to our liberties, but we're not entitled to somebody else's money. What people, through the politicians, demand or want or insist on, the politicians accommodate, and they become entitlement. And literally, I imagine more than 50% of the people in this country still think that an entitlement is a right, but an entitlement isn't a right. We get our lives and our liberty from our Creator. We get it in a natural way. Woo! We don't get it from the government, but if we have a right to our life and our liberties, we ought to have a right to keep the fruits of our labor. Of course, there would be no income tax if you could live with that. Will challenge me, of course, because I want to start off the first year with a token cut of $1 trillion. The questions are very sincere because they've studied only Keynesian economics. And I say, well, what will happen? We're in a recession. What would happen if the government quit spending $1 trillion? I said, well, think of it this way. It isn't so much that the government's going to, the fact that the government's quitting spending $1 trillion, it would be that the government would quit spending it and the people would spend $1 trillion. And that's what would happen, and that would be much better. I, quite frankly, am very frank about what I think the nature and the philosophy of a president ought to be. The president shouldn't be running the economy. You know, the president doesn't know what to do. The Congress doesn't know what to do. Only the people know what to do on how to run the economy. Woo! Get out of this mess by snapping our fingers and everything will be perfect. But I know what we're doing is wrong, it's prolonging the agony, and it's going to be worse than our depression if we don't change our ways. But what we need to do, though, is not scare people with what the correction is all about. Because I don't think we should propose our viewpoints by saying, well, I have the problems as long as you're willing to sacrifice. But why would it be that if I came along and talked to the businessman and to you and this audience and say, look, what I want to do is I want to deregulate you. I don't want the federal coming down in your states and having mandates. I don't think that's a sacrifice to have less regulations from the federal government. Sacrifice to you if you could trust the currency. How many here now would say, well, I'm saving for my children's education, I'm going to buy a 20-year bond and make a 0.5% or 0.25%, and I'll know I'll have the purchasing power in 20 years. Nobody believes that. So what if you had spent money and you could save money and you could be confident that you can take care of your future? Not only that, the prices of education would come down. But why would it be a sacrifice to us if you didn't have any income tax? That doesn't sound like a sacrifice to me. I would think this would be wonderful. Not only would we have to change, the people have to change their attitude about what the role of government ought to be. And that is important because no matter how many people have in Washington, they will reflect the demands of the people. So if the people still say entitlements are rights and we want to steal money from one group and you give it to us, it's not going to work. So we have to change people's attitude about the role of government. But there's another area that we have to at least address, and I believe we have to change to get this correction over with. And that has to do with what we're doing overseas. DoD budget's not this big, but believe me, there are a lot of other budgets that are involved in what we're doing overseas. The intervention, the State Department, the CIA, our troops, and taking care of the wounded and all, it's costing us over $1 trillion. Our wars in the last 10 years, 10, 11 years now, has added $4 trillion worth of debt to our national debt. But just think of, what if we had had this $4 trillion in the economy? Just think how much richer this economy would be. And what have we gotten for all these wars? We've gotten nothing but grief. I mean, we're not spreading our Constitution. We're not spreading our goodness. We're spreading a viewpoint of America which I don't think is a good viewpoint of America. People believe they have a moral obligation, starting with Woodrow Wilson, that we had to prove to the world that we were the most moral and most wise nation, and we had the right and the obligation to force our way and to teach other people. This though doesn't work. Using force to force our goodness on anybody cancels out all the goodness. Great country, the freest and the richest, and we have a lot of wonderful traits and wonderful characteristics that we've won to. But why don't we concentrate on a free market economy, a sound currency, protection of civil liberties, a sensible foreign policy, and then we could be a nation where other countries would want to emulate us and follow our lead. But unless we change our attitude, and that means the people, about how much we should be involved overseas, it's not going to happen. We're going to work to the bankruptcy, and that's not real far off. So my position is that it should be a lot easier for liberals and conservatives and independents to come together and cut overseas spending and cut these wars. That's what I think would be the easiest thing to get back. Simply means we bring our troops home. The other thing about this is that it's a way to work our way out of it. If we don't work our way out of it and have a dollar collapse, everybody's checks bounce. And then you have political chaos, and then I worry about our civil liberties. But if we do this sensibly and cut the spending overseas, what about all this effort to worry about a border that nobody can identify between Pakistan and Afghanistan? Think of how much fighting and killing we're going over there. Nobody even knows where it all, so we just bomb everybody. But what about our own borders to the south? You know. We can do that with a lot less resources than worrying about all those overseas borders.